I've titled today's talk Periclean Rhetoric, Its Limitations and Victories. I've titled it specifically Limitations and Victories because I see Pericles succeeding in a lot of areas, but when it comes to the main thing that I don't see the historians necessarily talking about, it looks like he fails. His rhetoric seems to reach its highest point in the funeral oration. Pericles was called the first citizen in that he was at the very top of the Athenian democracy, and he got there by somewhat disingenuous means, according to the elites of his day, because he was an elite. He came from a rich, successful family, yet he was at the head of the demos, the people of Athens, and he catalyzed them in their war against Sparta in the Second Peloponnesian War. So I thought to myself, why is this oration that he delivers at the end of the first year of the Peloponnesian War so very famous? So I went and looked it up. You can look it up too and go read it. And it's mainly bombastic rhetoric, focusing on the glory of Athens, the great buildings and monuments, the might of Athens, even though they don't make their men undergo a program like the Spartans to develop military vigor, the greater artistic and intellectual prowess of Athens, and that's basically it. Athens is great, everyone else is not as great, and goodbye. So that's intriguing because he knew exactly what to say to cater to the people who were hearing him at that moment. Even though it wasn't what someone else might have said. He could have just said, I'm very sorry that your men, your sons have died, your brothers have died. But that's not what he said. He said, go out, be honorable, be virtuous, which is not necessarily a comforting thing to say, but more of a catalyzing thing to say. So the question I then asked is, okay, obviously he knows how to use rhetoric. He knows how to use the means of persuasion. So then why did that not work? Or why did he not consider using his skill to bring people together outside of Athens, outside of the Athenian Empire that was once the Delian League? So we'll talk more about that in a second. But another thing that's interesting is he admits outright at the beginning of his oration that it is more important to impress truthfulness, to appear truthful, than to be truthful. He mentions outright that it's more important to be viewed as honorable, or he doesn't mention that, but what he says about truthfulness is reminiscent of what Aristotle says in his book on rhetoric. And it leads you to believe, okay, is he entirely being honest about who he is? Or is he influencing and pulling strings and all of that? So he has a lot of great skill. I mean, his name is thrown around a lot today. We refer to the age of Pericles, the golden age of Greece. Pericles brought so much art and amazing stuff to Athens. So what did he do? Well, he brought the Delian League together and made them the Athenian Empire. He forged them more than anyone else, in my opinion, than anyone else after the Persian Wars, after the victories at Salamis and Plataea. And the Athenian system is very intellectual. Its democracy forms on intellectual thought. The folk who work under the democracy are great artisans, great craftsmen. They also have warriors, and they have people with military prowess like unto Sparta, but their main focus is on the other softer skills. We have a massive contrast in the Spartan system. The Spartan doesn't care for a nice turn of phrase. The Spartan doesn't care for the beautiful oration, but rather focuses on responsibility and forging men and forging people who can go out and win a battle. And their entire education system functions on this. The stratification in their system is also deeper. I'm not calling either one good or bad. I'm just pointing out what they do and how they seemed pitted against one another prior to this Peloponnesian War. But what's so very interesting is that prior to the Peloponnesian War, when Persia invades from the north by land and at one point from the south by sea, they're brought together in a common enemy. So the question that came to mind, again, is why do we not see the coalescing of a Greek ethnic identity, a national identity, like what Germany did under Bismarck, and going into the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s, or perhaps in what Italy did in unifying their many city-states. So these questions don't seem to have ready answers right on the page in the historical source material, but I do have some opinions on that I think might give us a positive perspective on Pericles' rhetoric and on its function and its limitations. So, we get done with the Persian Wars. The Athenians have their Athenian Empire, what was formerly the Delian League. The Spartans have their Spartan coalition and their allies. And Corinth has a dispute with Corcyra. I believe it's a land dispute, I don't remember exactly, but Corcyra sends envoys to Athens and says, hey, can you send some ships? They do that, and that is seen as a breaking of a treaty that had formerly stood between Athens and Sparta. The Spartans are not very pleased with that, so that begins making the domino chips fall towards war. The Spartans send envoys to Athens multiple times to attempt to assuage the difficulty and prevent the outbreak of hostilities, and it doesn't happen. There's just so much divisive rhetoric going on. They're being divided. They're against each other. And it's really sad because it's to both of their detriment. They're living in the middle of the golden age of Greece. And a quote on my notes says, let me see if I can find it. Quote, the Peloponnesian War marked a significant power shift in ancient Greece, favoring Sparta, and also ushered in a period of regional decline that signaled the end of what is considered the golden age of ancient Greece. So the off-the-page thought that comes to mind is what would have happened if perhaps they had decided to come together and form a very vigorous, energetic, unified Grecian identity, an identity of the Hellenes, under a ruler or under some sort of form of government. And there's lots of reasons why that might not have happened, but I want to analyze specifically the role of Pericles' rhetoric in it. One thought that comes to mind is that it obviously was a brutal, bloody war. So why did it continue to be prosecuted after Pericles' death in, I believe, 429 BC from the plague? Because the bulk of the war remained to be fought. So you can say that the identity of the Spartan and the Athenian was so pitted against each other that they were irreconcilable, or you can say that something impelled them forward. I would point out that that might be the rhetoric of Pericles. Consider the fact that he ruled for so long. Consider that his funeral oration is remembered today as a stunning use of rhetoric and the ability to appeal to his people. So perhaps his rhetoric can be blamed for the bloodshed. His rhetoric can be perhaps blamed for not allowing the Athenians and Spartans to come together in a unified national identity. And think how history might have been different. If that had not happened, if he had turned his rhetoric outside of the Athenian bubble and turned it towards a unified identity of the Hellenes, we might have a vigorous thought and action unification, the great intellectual might of the Athenian and the militaristic might of the Spartan. And we might not be talking about Rome or any other empire that controls the Mediterranean besides Greece. That could have changed history. But it was a missed opportunity. So that's my positive perspective on that. But what ended up happening was you had folks who valued thought and folks who valued action, and they were divided to their harm, to their great harm. They were enriched after the Persian Wars. Sparta was enriched and set in a position of management over their league. Athens was set in a position of management over their empire. But they were not unified because of rhetoric, perhaps. Now, it doesn't mean you throw out rhetoric and say rhetoric isn't going to be useful, because not everybody is intellectual as a person who delights in the syllogism. Welcome to life. That's life. So, to get things done, rhetoric still has to be used. But how does rhetoric fit into a delight in thought? How might it function to bring together those who delight in thought and those who delight in action? And does this dichotomy even have to exist? Could it have been unified into a cohesive whole? I really believe it could have. I hope that this gets you thinking as we continue to move forward about delight in thought, the role of rhetoric and the trivium in such, and the role of logos in all of this. Thanks for listening, and hope this has helped you think about some thoughts.